In today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about shoulder pain and the relationships between lower back pain. It's going to be a little bit of a different episode, primarily because some of these episodes, they're informed by our members, they're informed by questions we get from you guys. Other topics, like today, are informed by our own experiences. And earlier this week, Lara happened to dislocate her right shoulder. Now, all's good. It was relocated pretty quickly, but we thought we'd use this opportunity to record a video to talk a little bit about the shoulder, a little bit about similarities between the shoulder and the lower back, and hopefully glean some lessons about how to move forwards. Because ultimately, how we react to setbacks when it comes to lower back pain, injuries in general, is the thing that we have control over. Sometimes we can do things a little bit better. For example, Lara this week, reaching down for that nappy bag as it was falling off her shoulder while she was carrying Evelina, etc., etc., etc. She could have just not reached for the nappy bag and let it go. Unfortunately, she did reach, dislocated the shoulder, and as a consequence, we've now got to go through a rehabilitation process. But we can, once we get past the initial kind of post-mortem, figuring out what happened, moving forward in a productive manner is the most important thing. And we don't want to spend too much time laboring over, oh, we could have done this, could have done that, why did I bother, etc., etc. Get on with moving forwards, because if we can condense the time between the injury happening and action being taken, we can generally effect a much better recovery process rather than leaving things for months, weeks on end, as so often happens with lower back pain. Most of the time, compared to this particular shoulder injury, lower back pain is something that creeps on. And if we just nip it in the bud and start taking the right actions, we can really do things or go through a much smoother recovery process. So hopefully we'll be able to draw some lessons from today's episode and learn a little bit more. So one of the important things that we wanted to talk about was giving you guys a step-by-step, what we're doing in this particular example. So in Lara's case, we've got an anterior dislocation. She's externally rotated the arm. It's popped out forwards. After asking another mother to hold on to Evelina, she'd managed to pop the shoulder back in, but we have an issue. And over the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour or so, by the time she got to me, the pain was starting to really kind of build up, the throbbing feeling in the shoulder, etc. So what are we going to do? The very first thing, whether it's a lower back injury, whether it's the shoulder, we want to stop making the situation worse. And this comes from two parts. Number one, it comes from education. And I'll talk about this with reference to lower back in a moment, but it comes with education, understanding what happened, what's going to make this worse, how does the tissue that we've injured actually function in the body. So we want to avoid stressing that tissue in the immediate short term. And then it's actionable steps, things that we can do, modifications we can make. So in the case of Lara's shoulder, the very first thing we want to do, because with this particular issue, she's popped it back in. So it's kind of, yes, it's throbbing a little bit, but when you're moving around the house, playing with Evelina, our daughter, picking her up or going to pick her up, instinctively, if something moves, you go to move the right arm. It happens to be her right shoulder, so it's the dominant arm, more likely to go and reach for things. So easiest thing to do in this scenario, get a sling on, and we just pop the sling on her shoulder, so it's obviously out of action. She can't go and use it. And the great thing about stopping making it worse when it comes to the shoulder is we have two shoulders. So she can use her left arm, her non-dominant arm, to do things. And while that thing is in the sling for the first couple of days, not all the time, by the way, but on and off, it just keeps that out of action so she can't inadvertently use it. We've all had situations where we've had lower back issues. We hear it time and time again. My back wasn't really bothering me until I reached down, until, that thing fell off the countertop while I was chopping the vegetables, whatever it may be. And then we move suddenly, and then we go. When it comes to the lower back, and stop making it worse, it's much more difficult. We don't have a spare lower back in the garage that we can just pull out when we've injured ours. So we have to start to understand that many of the things that we're doing on a daily basis are making the back worse. And that's where the education comes in. And the actionable steps to start to bend better, start to move better, start to brace the core when we're moving around the house. Learn to do that if we haven't. Undo some of those bad patterns that we've developed over the years that have led to the precipitation of the back pain, and by and large are stopping us getting better. What I would say from lower back pain specifically, because of the difficult nature of the fact that we don't have a spare, one of the biggest factors, and I would say maybe even this contributes to upwards of 50% of your recovery or lack thereof, are the daily activities, especially if we're talking about long-standing lower back pain. You've tried different treatments, they haven't worked, or they haven't provided lasting relief, because we never address the daily activities that are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the way we instinctively move. Starting to unlearn some of those bad habits and replace them with good habits by way of education is something that we can immediately do to stop making it worse. So that's the first one. Step number 2 is to try and support the natural healing process. So in the case of Lara, we were able to jump straight in there and start using laser because we have it. You probably don't have one of a class 4 laser because that's a technical bit of kit that is very expensive, and the average person does not have that. And that's just from the clinic days. But we're getting on there, doing laser on the shoulder at the area of injury. Twice a day we've been doing it, and we're down to once a day right now, twice a day on and off, working to accelerate the healing process. For you, that could be using contrast bathing, using hot and cold to make sure we're getting appropriate circulation to that shoulder or that lower back, as the case may be, to help it go through an unencumbered healing process. And we'll get onto a few nuances a little bit later on, but when it comes to doing everything we can to help that healing process, we have to understand that our body is really quite marvelous. It will try and do the healing. If we can, one, stop making it worse and start to provide the right sort of support, the body will heal itself. Nothing you do you can't actively heal. You can't say, I'm going to make myself heal. I'm going to do my exercises or whatever the case may be. You can do that, but you can't do the healing. And there's good and bad in that. Number one, you can't really speed it up unless you've got access to some of these other bits and pieces. But you don't need to, because your body is always going to try and heal. When you cut yourself, you don't do anything to make it heal. It just heals. Your body is trying to do that, whether it's a lower back disc injury, whether it's a shoulder injury like Lara's, where she strained the anterior capsule and we've had that dislocation, whether it's any manner of different illnesses or injuries, your body is always trying to heal. And the biggest thing we can often do is move out of the way, stop making it worse, so it can go through that process. Now, using things like contrast bathing, as we've discussed in the past, and we'll discuss again, no doubt, in future videos, where we're alternating heat and cold over the area, be it the shoulder or the lower back. It's particularly helpful in cases of the lower back where we have degenerative change. But that's a nice thing that we can actively do multiple times through the day to really help that recovery process speed up. And one of the devices that we've been looking into, which is more of a consumer device that some of you guys can potentially use, is the Thermocube from Therabody, which coincidentally I ordered last week to test it. We became aware of this device, and we often recommend to members and you guys on here that actually for some of you, using contrast bathing can be a little bit more effective than just using the icing on the lower back specifically. And that happened to come the day after Lara had injured her shoulder, so we've been using that as well on and off through the day also to just help optimize that recovery and that healing process. So there's two things. One, you guys can do at home with a bag of frozen peas, with those heat pads that you can put in the microwave to improve the circulation, be it the shoulder, the knee, the elbow, the lower back. And then also, obviously, if we've got access to treatments, then we can use those as well. The next thing where we start to come to actions that you can take that are kind of moving forwards is really important. And this is about stability. When we become injured, let's move aside from let's say, a muscle strain specifically. Lower back injuries are not muscle strains. We have muscle strains associated with lower back injuries, but we've generally injured a joint. Now, in the case of Lara, we've got the shoulder. Now, what's going to happen when we injure the shoulder? Her rotator cuff muscles are going to be a little bit confused as to why the ball and socket are so far apart from one another, and they're going to go into a bit of spasm. And she's been feeling some soreness in and around the rotator cuff on the back of the shoulder as well, subsequent to this. In the case of the lower back, we've injured the disc, we've injured the facet joints, we've got some sort of segmental issue, as we've discussed in previous episodes. So the stability of that segment is compromised. So what we want to try and do is restore stability and recognize that the subsequent disuse of that joint, the lower levels of activity, mean that the muscles are going to kind of deflate a little bit. From disuse, they kind of go a little bit relaxed, kind of like when we wake up first thing in the morning, and they're not quite as pumped. So using small amounts of pain-free motion is particularly helpful to just keep that area awake. So in the case of Lara for her shoulder, that's been doing some isometric stability exercises using the resistance bands on a pain-free range, I must stress. And from point of view, she could hardly move the shoulder up to this point and out to here in the first day or so after injuring this shoulder. But we're what, 4 or 5 days in now as I'm recording this episode. She did it on Tuesday. It's now Saturday morning, and she's moving the shoulder an awful lot better. But we started out just doing very simple pain-free range of motion movements with the shoulder. For example, holding a resistance band between two arms and just coming up gently like so with the other arm, with the good arm. And now she's able to come all the way up to here without getting that pain. So small amounts of pain-free range of motion. Now, in the shoulder, we're actually using the rotator cuff muscles here and some of the other musculature. Why? Because unlike the hip joint, which is a very deep joint, it's a nice stable ball and socket joint, the shoulder is not. And this is very similar to the lower back. The shoulder relies on the integrity, the compression of the rotator cuff muscles to hold the ball and socket in place, because it's more like an egg on a spoon rather than a ball and socket, as is the case for the hip. So we need those muscles to be active. And if we're not using the shoulder because we've got it in a sling too much, so we don't want to use the sling earlier too much, then those muscles are going to kind of relax and turn off. So we want to regularly through the day be doing some of these little exercises, 15, 20, 25 reps, to just pump up those muscles to give that extra layer of stability, because the capsule isn't necessarily going to provide that because it's been injured and it's compromised. And that's very similar to your lower back. Your lower back, we don't have the ability to stabilize L4-5, L5-S1 that we've injured, whether it's a disc bulge or whatever injury you have. But we do have the ability to provide growth support from our core engagement and learn how to move using our hips so that our hips can do the movement and our core can hold things nice and steady. And also, then we also have the walking. The amount of times that we used to get in clinic, someone might have booked an appointment because an emergency appointment, they've hurt their back, they wake up the next morning, they're in excruciating pain for a number of reasons, which I won't get into here. And they've got to come in for the appointment. They say, I can't get out of bed. I'm really struggling. I can't come in. I say, no, just come in. And often, the amount of times they'd come in and go, actually, do you know what? I feel better now than I did when I called you this morning. Why? Because that little bit of movement, just that little bit of walking, is enough to just get rid of some of the excess inflammation and just help that recovery process. And also the process of walking, engaging the muscles, supporting that area, kind of wakes them up a little bit as well to provide that support. And in the early days post-injury, support and protection of your own musculature is vital. You can't really stabilize the shoulder with a strap. You can't really stabilize you cannot stabilize the lower back with a support, specifically the segments that we're talking about most commonly, which is the L4-5 and the L5-S1 region. So we must learn to provide that stability is immediately, because the simple reality is, yes, in the case of the shoulder, we can support it with a sling, but for our lower back, everyone is still living life in spite of having a profuse disc bulge. You're still going to get in the car to go to the surgeon, even if it's to have an injection or something else. You're still going to get in the car to go to the osteopath, the physio, the chiropractor, or more likely get in the car or get into transport to go to work. You're still going to get up in the morning. You're still going to do all the various bits and pieces. You're probably going to still get dressed, which involves numerous movements that are more strenuous than the focus movements you could be doing as part of a rehabilitative approach. So we must make time to do those simple strengthening or simple engagement movements in the early days, more or less immediately, because you're not going to be bedbound, and being bedbound, particularly with lower back pain, is just a recipe for disaster, especially if we start to talk about extended periods, because we just lose what little muscle mass many of us did have prior to that. That brings us to step number 4. And this is really, we're not there yet with Lara, although she kind of is because she's improved some of the range of motion. But over the coming days, weeks, months, improving the range of motion that we're doing some of these simple exercises with. Now, in the case of Lara's shoulder, it's going to be sort of these pressing motions, changing the resistances that we're using, changing from a resistance band maybe to a kettlebell or to a small dumbbell. Some of the other shoulder movements that we're going to be doing to keep those muscles stimulated. In the case of your lower back, it's a little bit different because we're not necessarily moving the joint that is injured, the discs, the spinal segments. We're focusing more here about improving the range of motion in the hips, in the knees and ankles, so that the hips, knees and ankles are stronger and able to move you through, for example, a squat more effectively. One of the things that we find with more or less all members when they start the program and when they have long-standing lower back pain, and we'd see this clinically in people that would come in to see us in the clinic with significant lower back pain or sciatica, is simple movements like a squat. They can't even squat down to a normal chair. So what on earth is happening every time we sit down, which we do many times a day, and every time we get out of a chair many times a day? It's done with bad form. And therefore, learning over the subsequent couple of days, weeks and months to start to do those movements like a squat, like a hip hinge, like a lunge when we go upstairs, with correct form, so that we're not compromising both the lower back, the knees, the hips, the ankles, and other areas, is vital. And the same thing with Lara's shoulder. Working again in that sort of pain-free range of motion. Now, it's different. If we've got pain kind of all the time and we're thinking about a chronic injury in the lower back or the shoulder, there may be a baseline level of discomfort that is there all the time, or level of pain or symptoms that are there all the time. So in that case, when we're doing something like a squat, or maybe we're doing a modified dead bug for our lower back, it's observing that during that movement, whatever it may be, throughout whatever range it is, that it's choreographed correctly and that there are no spikes in pain. If we find that as we move the leg or the back in one way or other and the pain elevates, we know that we've probably done something wrong and we need to reflect on that and modify the movement. If, for example, Lara is doing some of these shoulder movements as she's going in certain directions, she starts to feel stress or a sharp spike in the pain, she's going to be aware of the compromise of that structure. She needs to back off slowly, reevaluate. Maybe we didn't hold things properly. Maybe we weren't moving our scapulothoracic joint, that's the shoulder blade, on the rib cage correctly. Maybe our posture wasn't correct when we were doing that. We were slouching a bit too much. For example, if I'm slouched over, hunched over, and I'm trying to move my shoulder, I'm limited in range of motion. If I move my shoulder blades back to the right position, I can all of a sudden go up correctly. And that's part of the reason that the shoulder was injured in the first place, because we were in a bit of a funny position trying to carry too many things. Same thing for the lower back. If we've got good posture, holding ourselves correctly, we're going to go through a good range of motion. And if we do that incorrectly, we allow our spine to move and aggravate the injury, which is not what we want. So we steadily work to increase the range of motion on some of these simple movements. And then the fifth part, which is the most important part, and the part that so often gets missed as people start to feel better. And this is why it comes back. And we get very demoralized, especially those of you that want to get back into the gym or get back into other activities. You do all your right stuff and then you stop doing it because you feel better. And you haven't finished the rehabilitation process. Because remember, your body is always trying to heal, but you are the conductor of the orchestra and you need to conduct that body to make sure that it heals back stronger than it was before. And that often requires continuation of your rehabilitative processes long after the pain has gone or dropped down to the tolerable levels that allow you to do all the things you want to do again. And that's really important. And this is perhaps why Lara injured her shoulder again, because she dislocated the shoulder many years ago, but because she was younger, it recovered relatively quickly, or the pain recovered relatively quickly. It wasn't necessarily the rehabilitation. And we've known for a while that Lara's shoulders could be a bit stronger, and it just hasn't been a priority to work on that. We all fall into these traps, but we need to do our best not to. So if you finish and you start to feel better, let's say with your lower back, and you're doing 10 squats, if 6 months from now, you're still only doing 10 squats occasionally, you haven't gotten any stronger. You've healed up, but you're still very vulnerable. Your risk of injury is not really going to have decreased in any meaningful way. You're still vulnerable to all sorts of daily activities. But if in 6 months' time, you're doing 10 squats with a 10 kilo weight, and you're going lower than you were before, you've made improvement. Congratulations, you've actually been doing things properly. And you continue to make improvements. So that in the next 6 months, you may be doing a little bit more weight. You're doing a little bit more reps. You're going a little bit deeper, doing better movement. So you're constantly looking to be better, because life will throw all sorts of obstacles. It may not be related to a re-injury. It may just be that you're unwell, that you're busy, that work comes up, that things happen in your personal life that mean that you haven't been as committed for whatever reason with your exercises, and you kind of fall out of it. And then you need to get back in. So you're always looking to make sure that you are steadily progressing in the difficulty of those exercises to make sure we're always building more and more strength and stability. And I can assure you, for the average person amongst you watching this video, you will not become a bodybuilder, you will not become a powerlifter, you will not become, ladies, you will not become bulky as a result of this, unless you are taking it to the extreme, which I know more or less none of you will be, because you don't have that desire. And you just want to do the training that you have to do to get the pain to go away so you can do what you want to do, which is all this stuff over here. Some of you, yes, you will enjoy the process of training and you want to get back into training, and that's why you're watching this video, to try and learn how you can get back into that, and that's great. But for the vast majority of you, particularly ladies, don't worry, you won't get bulky by continuing to progress this process, but you will get safer, stronger, decrease the risk of injury, and increase your resilience for the long term. And many benefits, especially as we go, particularly women here, through the process of menopause, thinking about bone density and other benefits that come from continuing this process of building strength and stability well into our, or consistently as we go through our years for years and decades to come. It will pay dividends in spades if you can just get into the habit of doing that for the long term. So hopefully this episode has been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a kind of a step-by-step as to where you should be going when you're recovering. Lara's going to be carrying on her rehabilitation process, and she's going to continue to start to strengthen this shoulder and the other shoulder to make sure that the risk of this sort of thing happening again is dramatically reduced. Know that your body is going to do the hard work. You just need to direct it. You need to give it the stimulation through your training. You need to give it the resources through your good nutrition, providing appropriate levels of protein in particular, because that's what's going to support you. If you've got the opportunity to have a little bit extra in the way of supplement support, for example, us using the joint supplements to help make sure that Lara's got enough stuff to repair and mend those joints, that's going to be helpful. If you've got mechanisms to do something like the contrast bathing, that's going to be helpful. And we can really all do that. Maybe we're going to use some of those extra devices to help us. That's great. If you're going to, employ or work with someone to help guide you through the process, we all go and see the mechanic for our car. We go and see the plumber if we've got a leak. We go and speak to the accountant if we've got tax issues or tax challenges or need to process that. We do it for all other things. Why not get a little bit of support when it comes to your lower back as well? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as it's in budget and you can afford to do so. Why not use that to help make the process smoother as you go through that recovery journey? Hopefully that's been helpful. Remember, your body is awesome. You just need to often get out of the way so you start making it worse so it can do its work, and just provide that appropriate stimulation to move it forwards in the right direction. So thanks so much for watching this episode. This is the last one of the year before Christmas, so there won't be a podcast coming out next week, but we will have a little email for those of you that are on the email list. There'll be a link somewhere around this video to sign up to that. It's free. We send that out every single Sunday, linking you guys to the episode of the podcast. Have a great Christmas if you're watching this live with us. If you're watching it after the fact, then hopefully you had a great Christmas and great New Year, and we will see you in the new year on the Back in Shape podcast. Thanks for watching.